that Solomon is teaching here. And so it's almost like Rehoboam becomes this unfriendly person that is being described here. And so, again, just to remind you a little bit of the situation, remember when Solomon died, Rehoboam took over the throne, and instead of listening to the wisdom of the elders, he listened to his unwise, foolish friends, and he clamped down on the country, and it caused a civil war, and Jeroboam took the 10 northern tribes, and Rehoboam was still king, but he only had the 2 southern tribes. All right, so Solomon warned his readers about behaving selfishly. He realized that not even a king could accomplish his goals without paying attention to the interests of those around him. And of course, history is replete with dictators or with very selfish individuals, of course, that would go into that. Solomon also warned his readers against being closed-minded. The person who thinks he or she is always right has no reason to listen to other perspectives. People who believe that their way is the only way are playing what? The fool. Exactly. It is better to first listen to others' opinions and consider what is being said before blurting out one's own thoughts. And, of course, that kind of goes along with verse 2, where it says, a fool has no delight in understanding, but in expressing his own heart. So, you've heard the expression about somebody who goes to court and defends themselves in court. The expression is that they have a fool for a lawyer. Exactly. All right, 4 words that can quickly build goodwill are what? What do you think? Last night I listened to about a 10-minute presentation by Sully Sullenberg. For those of you who don't remember who he is, you don't remember the Miracle on the Hudson, the U.S. Airways plane that took off from New York and struck birds, lost total power, and they ended up having to do emergency landing on the Hudson River. Anyway, he was talking about what he'd been trained to do and what his co-pilot had been trained to do. And at one point, in the midst of all this chaos, he turned to his co-pilot and said, what do you think? He thought he had done everything according to the book, but he just wanted to make sure. And his co-pilot, in genuine humility, said, I can't think of anything else. That was their whole conversation as his plane was crashing into the Hudson River. Okay. But he did that because he wanted to make sure that he hadn't forgotten something. And so that really fits into this here. By the way, the next sentence that came out of both of their mouths, okay, that was the only thing they said during this whole thing. Everything was automatic except the co-pilot was calling out elevations and airspeed. When they hit the water and the plane finally stopped, both of them turned to one another at the same time, said the same thing. Well, that went better than I thought.
You got everybody out.
Everybody survived.
Yes.
Everybody survived. They call it the miracle on the Hudson. The thing that bothers me about Sullenberg's testimony, and it's very, very enlightening, is he never once ever gives God the credit.
That's that.
That God intervened. Because to me, it's a miracle.
Because
I mean, he said everything had to go just right when they hit that water. But anyway, yeah, he never once thanks God for that. So, all right. So, what do you think? In verse 4, the deep waters he refers to suggest the concealment of truth. Okay? The words of a man's mouth are as deep waters. And again, what's scary about jumping into deep water is you don't know what's down there. If it's shallow water and it's crystal clear and you can see the bottom, it's one thing. But deep waters conceal things. And so that's the idea. Deep waters tend to be dark and murky below the surface. It is difficult to see them through to the bottom. Wise words, in contrast, are clear and refreshing. All right. Honesty in action. is as vital as honesty in words. Solomon warned his readers against practicing favoritism in their judgments. Whether rich or poor, royal or common, all people are to be judged impartially under God's laws. Special care is to be taken to be fair to the widows, orphans, and foreigners. One thing that really bothers many of us about our society, and this is not political, this is just talking about our whole judicial system, is that it's not fair. Not at all. And it seems to be very, very, very partial. And that's not good at all. All right. As we're going through this, talking about the character traits of an unfriendly or foolish person, there is a box on page 72 entitled The Foolish Son. Would somebody read about the foolish son?
Solomon described the unfriendly person as one who pursues selfish gain and goes against sound judgment. Solomon's son Rehoboam fits this description to a T. Upon Solomon's death, his son Rehoboam became king in his place. When the people of Israel requested that Rehoboam lessen the heavy tax burden that Solomon had imposed on them, he was torn between two sets of advisors. His older advisors suggested that he respond to them in a compassionate tone. His younger friends advised him to respond harshly. When Rehoboam decided to follow the foolish advice of his friends, 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel immediately turned away from him and appointed a new king for themselves, Jeroboam. The nation of Israel never again united after Rehoboam's attempt to establish his power.
So this is what we mentioned earlier. So it's weird that basically Solomon's own son seems to go against his own advice in all of this. All right, the final character traits of unfriendly people have to do with their habits of quarreling and gossiping. Well, we never gossip or quarrel, so we can just ignore that, right? Right. Okay. Solomon repeatedly warned his readers not to practice either of these foolish forms of communication. People who are looking for fights usually find them. And I don't know if you've ever met somebody like that, but there's some people I do not like talking to because it's almost like they want to start an argument. Mm-hmm. And no matter how you try to steer away from it, they're not happy unless you fight with them. Mm-hmm. Just as the person who quarrels hurts himself or herself, the gossip hurts others. While watching the behavior in the royal court, Solomon discovered that many persons enjoyed hearing gossip. Often such persons crave gossip in much the same way as others crave a delicacy. Solomon described the gossip's word as choice morsels. Such tasty tidbits might seem pleasing going down, but in the end they sicken the spirit of the hearer. I don't see it quite as much as I used to, but you used to go to the grocery store and you get in line and you're forced to just stand there in line. And what do they have all over the racks? Mm-hmm. Yeah, all these slander sheets, all these gossip sheets, and they have these big headlines, which of course catches your eye, and you go, what? And then you find out nothing's true about it. But anyway, people love gossip. And Solomon warns about that it's foolish. So, anyway, so the words that Mark read to us again, as he was reading them, like verse 7, a fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. It just really reminded me of the book of James and the wisdom literature that we have there. All right, so let's take a look at security in God, and that's verses 9 through 17. Would somebody read those verses for us?
One who is slack in his work is brother to one who destroys. The name of the Lord is a fortified tower. The righteous run to it and are safe. The wealth of the rich is their fortified city. They imagine it a wall too high to scale. Before a downfall, the heart is haughty, but humility comes before honor. To answer before listening, that is folly and shame. The human spirit can endure in times of illness, but a crushed spirit who can bear. The heart of the discerning acquires knowledge, for the ears of the wise seek it out. A gift opens the way and ushers the giver into the presence of the great.
And verse 17.
Oh, in a lawsuit, the first to speak seems right until someone comes forward and cross-examines.
Very interesting the way your version phrases that. So, and that is very, very true, obviously. So, okay, so Solomon realized that security that many people find in things is nothing but an illusion. As a powerful, wealthy king, he would have been tempted to believe that his money, social status, and military would keep him safe from danger. However, the king knew better. As a student of biblical history, he had heard about others. And of course, there's Pharaoh, Pharaoh of Egypt. He thinks he's greater than God. In fact, remember, as we've gone through our series together, when Moses stands before him and says, the Lord says to do this, what is Pharaoh's response?
I don't know who that guy is.
Yeah, who's the Lord that I should know him? I'm Pharaoh. And of course, he ends up losing his whole army, possibly himself, at the bottom of the Red Sea, when the waters crashed in. And then, of course, there is King Saul, who started out with all of this great potential and ended up losing it all. Tragic end to his life. So, and then it mentions that during his 40-year reign, obviously Solomon saw a lot of people who came through the court and realized what was going on here. So, a person who has a false sense of security usually becomes what? Sluggish and unmotivated. So if you don't think you need to work, or if you don't think you need any money, you don't think you need it, what's the motivation? Again, I'm not trying to be political, but one of my concerns about what was done during COVID was all of this money that was sent out paying people not to work. And now you see all of these businesses around town, and I'm not kidding. Everywhere you go, it says we're hiring, we're hiring, we're hiring. But I think a lot of people have gotten so used to just staying home and collecting a check. It's, why bother?
Well, aren't there some states going to give another stimulus?
Yes, including the state of Oregon. And the
That's
state
really
of
going to
Washington's
help our
not on that
inflation
list.
problem, isn't it?
State of Washington's not on that list, but Oregon is on that list.
No, speaking of talking about fools, our economy is already suffering great inflation, so pump some more phony money into it. That will really bring it down.
Well, and we are not in a recession, because if you redefine what a recession is, then you can say whether we're in it or not. So,
A
anyway.
lot of people feel they're below, a job is below them,
Yeah,
beneath them.
right.
A lot of people do.
Or if
Like
you don't
McDonald's.
get $20 or more
Would
an
you,
hour.
would you go to
Yeah.
McDonald's and work?
If I didn't have any other work to do.
But,
I sure would.
Yeah.
yeah, but
It's
a lot
better
of people
than no
don't.
job's better than.
That's where that
Yeah.
sloth and
Right.
stuff comes
And
in.
they made more than I made working for the school district.
That's true.
Yeah, starting.
Flippin' burgers was more profitable than tutoring kids.
But if you really want to get rich, become a preacher.
Well, yeah,
I'm not my career.
remember your friend Kenneth Copeland?
Go ahead.
Really.
I'm not complaining.
Write him a letter.
I'm not complaining, but seriously, many years ago, I figured out how many hours I work every week, and I compared it to salary, and I realized that I was working far below minimum wage. That's fine, far below. All
Well,
right,
you're working for God.
there we go.
Good.
The retirement plan's out of this world.
That's true.
Yes, your retirement plan is quite a little bit better.
Okay. But Solomon compared a person who is slack in his or her own work to someone who destroys the work of others. Though such a comparison might at first sound exaggerated, there's much truth in it. The success of any project rests on the quality put into every job related to that project. For example, a person who compromises on the foundation of a building could cause the destruction of the entire building, no matter how strong the walls are. So, here's Sutherland Enterprises. They come to do some finished carpentry, But if somebody else screwed up the foundation, eventually the whole thing's gonna fall apart.
It's on that door that I
Right.
just fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah, we come across this all the time where houses have sunk because they don't really have a footing under the foundation.
Yeah.
The walls.
And so the foundation goes down, the doors start to hang up, and then somebody comes along, shaves the top of the door, then it goes down a little bit and shave off some more. And then pretty soon when you go to get a replacement on the door, you can't fit a new door in the thing because it's like an inch and a half off of the top. So
So what are you gonna do?
Oh dear, yeah.
I can see that.
But in a tiny, tiny way, we dealt with that in our last board meeting on Thursday for downstairs.
Yeah,
The church isn't gonna fall down, but we've got a problem down there.
right. And it's the foundation.
Uh-huh.
And it's because they tried to save money during the Depression. So, and 81 years later, we're now having to deal with it. So, anyway. All right, so in other words, and it also says that people who are sluggish in their work also have a demoralizing effect on those who want to produce. So if you're a part of a team and no one else wants to work, but you do, eventually it's going to affect you. Why bother? You know? And so again, Solomon sees this from his point of view as king and seeing what's going on in his kingdom. The only true security to deal with in life's difficulties rests in a reconciled and growing relationship with God. Solomon compared the name of the Lord to a strong tower that the righteous could run to whenever they were in danger. His name as Lord, and by the way, I watched a video, I sent it to Martin Gary, he loves it. We're probably going to show it one of these days on a Sunday evening. And the Hebrew name for God is the Yod, He, Vav, He. There's 4 Hebrew letters, often referred to as the Tetragrammaton. In the original Hebrew letters, not the current block letters, but the original pictographic letters, those 4 letters tell a story, and they actually tell the story of salvation. And the name Lord, as we translate it in English, is used over 700 times in the Old Testament. And so what this presenter was saying is the Lord, all the way through, was sharing the gospel, showing the promise of salvation, just by naming the word Lord all the way through. So it's interesting that this is one of these cases here where Solomon says the name Lord, and that's the Yod, He, Vav, He, the 4, notice I'm going from right to left, by the way, literally means I am who I am. And so Solomon says that the Lord is a strong tower. And that's important for us to remember during these times. What we're going through now is nothing like the Great Depression. I realize that. But yet these are difficult times and they could get worse, and we see what's going on in the world. But the one thing we can rely on is the Lord himself. Okay, instead of running to the Lord for safety, some people seek security in what? Riches. Okay, and obviously we live in a society where it's virtually impossible to function without money. Okay, so remember, the Bible never ever says that money is evil. What does the Bible say? The love of money is the root of all evil. Right, and so that's my concern about our society, is that we have so many people who want to get rich, who want more and more and more and more. And there are some young people that Trudy and I know in our community, I'll keep it totally anonymous, and every time we turn around, they're buying something new, they're on a trip, they're whatever, and it seems to me like their debt load is just getting higher and higher and higher and higher. You wonder when all this is going to come crashing down someday. And so anyway,
A lot is never enough.
right,
That's just a true statement.
back around the turn of the last century, a reporter went to John D. Rockefeller, the patriarch of the
That's
whole
what I was thinking,
Rockefeller
yeah.
plan. Exactly. And in the interview, he said, "Mr. Rockefeller, how much money is enough?" And he looked at the reporter and said, "Just a little bit more." So Another famous statement interview was they were touring his yacht, and the reporter said, "Mr. Rockefeller, how much did this thing cost?" And he looked at the reporter and said, "Young man, if you have to ask, you can't afford it." All right. So,
a whole lot of money.
yeah. So anyway, there have been strong towers, but not of the Lord. And your study guide gives an example of Jericho. Again, Jericho seemed to be an impregnable fortress, and you have just a bunch of these former Hebrew slaves, and then those who were literally other than Joshua and Caleb. The rest were born in the wilderness, and all they do is march around the city. But what did God do? He brought those walls crumbling down. So anyway, we need to be very careful what we put our faith in. In addition to trusting in God, Solomon wanted his readers to develop good relationships with the people in their community. He taught them to carefully listen to other people's opinions and feelings before sharing their own. And verse 13 says, I'm looking at the wrong chapter. He who answers a matter before he hears it, it is folly and shame to him. And so, again, have you ever had a conversation with somebody and it's obvious after a little bit that they're not listening to a word you're saying? They have their own agenda and they're just talking about their own thing, and you wonder why you're even talking.
Yeah.
And again, according to Solomon, that is a foolish thing to do. A person who has discernment will naturally acquire more wisdom. Solomon said, "In the ears of the wise who seek out knowledge." We can assume from his choice of the ears over the mouth that more wisdom is gained by listening than from talking. And again, you've heard the old expression. Yes, Debbie just showed us. How many ears do you have?
Two.
How many mouths do you have? Okay,
Well, some politicians seem to have two.
they have a unique ability. They can talk out of both sides of their mouth at the same time. So that's a unique ability. Also,
That's all you have to have
politicians
to be a
never
politician.
answer questions. Have you noticed that?
Never.
Yes.
You can ask a politician a question. He'll talk for 5 minutes, and when he's done, you realize he's never answered the question. So it's unique ability. It's a gift. It's a gift. Oh my goodness. So the other thing that I've learned from older, wise people is that older, wise people never stop learning. They never stop learning. In fact, I said something the other day, and I'm not saying that I'm wise. I am old, I know, but I'm wise. And that is that as of this summer, I've been licensed with the Alliance for 47 years. Okay. I realize that I now know less than I did when I started 47 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
When I first got licensed with the Alliance, I just graduated from college, and I thought I knew everything. Okay. Now I realize how little I really know, and the more I study about Scripture, seriously, I realize how little I know. The more I learn, the less I realize I know. And so anyway, there's wisdom in that, according to Solomon. The wise person may find it expedient to be on friendly terms with people of power. Now, this sounds interesting. Sometimes a token gift opens the doors of access. Solomon was not encouraging bribery here. The king was simply encouraging his readers to use worldly, temporal resources to benefit others in order to establish relationships that could have eternal significance. And your study guide quotes Jesus. Have you ever heard of Jesus? Okay. In Luke chapter 16, verse 9, and it is quoted in your study guide on page 75. Would somebody read the words of Jesus?
Use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings.
Yeah, that's interesting. This is even Jesus' words. And so, again, whatever God has blessed us with, we need to use for His glory. And that's different than bribery. Although our missionaries, we now call them international workers, struggle with something. They go to countries around the world. And, for instance, there'll be a ship, and all of their stuff has been unloaded on the dock. And all they need is a piece of paper from a customs agent so they can take their stuff and get to work. But this customs agent won't give them their piece of paper because he keeps waiting and waiting and waiting.
4A?
Gift.
Yeah,
Yes,
4A.
yes. And again, many of our missionaries, because of our society, believe that bribery is wrong and illegal. So they don't want to do anything. They'll just set their stuff on the dock, and it's going to sit there. And finally, they have to look at it as a gratuity, as a gift, as just the way that you do business in that country. And again, they feel guilty about it, but sometimes that's just the case.
It's a tip.
It's a tip. Yeah, it's a tip. But generally speaking, if you go to a restaurant, the waitress doesn't keep your food on the cart until you give her the tip.
Yeah.
But in some places, yeah. All right. And by the way, giving a tip, we need to be careful of our motivation. Hopefully it's because we appreciate the good service and we appreciate what they're doing. It's not so that next time you go in, that person will say, ooh, that's a good tipper, I'll give them extra service, you know. All right. Solomon ended this section with an admonition to his readers to hear both sides of the story before coming to a decision. I have served on a jury before, and I'm well aware of what Solomon is saying here. Lawyers are very, very, very good at spinning their case. And if you only hear one side, you'd be tempted to believe that lawyer, whether it's for the defense or for the prosecution. But then when you hear both sides, then you go, oh my, there's two sides to this. So, all right, true friendship. And that is in verses 18 through 24.
Casting a lot settles disputes and keeps strong opponents apart. A brother wronged is more unyielding than a fortified city. Disputes are like the barred gates of a citadel. From the fruit of their mouth, a person's stomach is filled. With the harvest of their lips, they are satisfied. The tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. He who finds a wife finds what is good and receives favor from the Lord. The poor plead for mercy, but the rich answer harshly. One who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother.
Okay, so again, these are brief snippets of wisdom here, and so we need to try to unpack them the best we can. So, Solomon believed that one of the greatest blessings a person can enjoy in life was involved in healthy friendships. Okay, healthy friendships. Therefore, he spent much of the time instructing his readers the best way to develop, protect, and if necessary, heal those relationships. So sometimes minor disagreements are going to develop that seem to be irreconcilable. In other words, you have two people and two opinions, and both person believes they're right. And so in that case, Solomon advises doing what?
Resolve it early.
But how?
Earlier in
Verse 18.
the law.
Casting
The lot, yeah. Have you ever drawn straws? Have you flipped a coin? There's all sorts of ways of doing something. And so sometimes, for instance, you have a former coach here, okay? You got a game, and, most times, the coach has an idea whether they want to start playing offense or defense. And so you can have the coaches stand out there and argue for an hour. Instead, what do they do? They flip a coin. And then whoever wins the coin toss gets to make the decision of what they want to be. And so anyway, it sounds like a very simple thing. But again, remember, in ancient Israel, they believed that God could actually direct the results of a situation like that.
Got a little short story that is an excellent example of that, where an innocent man and a murderer were brought to court, and there's so much evidence against the innocent man that they couldn't really make a decision, so they decided to do the dice. and whoever got the dice favorably, the highest number of points, he was set free. Well, the murderer rolled the dice first, and he got a double 6. And the other guy thought, well, it's no chance for me. But when he rolled it, the Lord split one of the dice in half, so his amount ended up 13 or 14. Actually showed, the dice split, and so you had more numbers available to you. And the whole court was flabbergasted. They knew this was God's hand, not just
Wow. Wow. Well, again, in the Old Testament, there's all sorts of cases where they cast lots. There's the Urim and the Thummim that were on the high priest's vest. Even when you get to the book of Acts, and again, they go back to Jerusalem, they think that it's God's will for them to replace Judas Iscariot, and so there's 2. And how do you decide between the 2? Well, they cast lots. Now again, whether that was God's will or not, Bible commentators argue about. But they believed that God would or could actually direct how that was.
Thinking about the testimony of 2 people, I think in the opening chapter, which is probably the beginning of Lee Strobel's conversion, he talks about that trial that he's covering, and he knows the dude is guilty. And finally another piece of evidence comes up, and it turns everything upside down. And I really think that was the beginning of his search for real truth.
The thing that I like about Lee Strobel and J. Warner Wallace, Lee Strobel was a court reporter, so he was familiar with the judicial system.
Assigned to this trial.
J. Warner Wallace was a cold case detective. Both of them experts on evidence. Both of them either atheists or agnostics. And finally, I have to take a look at the evidence. And using their expertise, one as a court reporter, one as a detective, take a look at the evidence. And both of them, if you listen to their testimonies, both of them had a crisis experience. Lee Strobel had all of this stuff laid out on his desk. J. Warner Wallace has all the stuff in his mind. And they realized that, like J. Warner Wallace said, there was only one roadblock left that hadn't been broken down. And that was his own will.
He was sitting in the road.
Yeah, that was his own will. And so, anyway, yeah, that's incredible. So, all right. By the way, they mentioned modern day binding arbitration as an example of sometimes how things have to be done in our society. All right, an essential element for maintaining a healthy relationship is controlling what we
Say.
The same tongue that can heal and nurture a relationship can also do what? Crush it. The agricultural metaphors used by Solomon in verse 20 indicate that a person's words can bear much fruit and be a significant source of personal satisfaction. The tongue is so influential that it holds what?
Power of life and death.
The power of life and death. I realize it's not physically speaking, but you hear about these young people nowadays that are committing suicide because they have been bullied online. There's all this gossip, there's all these negative comments, and they cannot handle it. And it's a devastating thing. So these words, even though they're not being physically spoken, they're being typed into the internet. These words can be devastating.
I used to have this line to some of my students. Well, I only said this, I didn't hit him. Those words are killing his soul. That's much worse. Just haul off and hit him, he'd be better off. But don't do that either.
Yeah.
Right. The old expression, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me, is not true.
Yeah, but
No, it's not true.
and I've asked myself that question for my own self and been convicted. Have I said a harsh word that kills somebody's spirit? That's worse than slugging them.
Yeah.
The other side of that coin is that we have to allow words to hurt us.
True.
And so it's a choice that we make.
It is true. We have to make a choice, but it's almost like being shot at by an arrow. And there goes the B-17 bomber.
Yes.
Yeah, it's they're doing tours. That's definitely a B-17 bomber. I mean, it's got an unparalleled sound to it. Yeah, they're doing tours from the airport, so.
No, that wasn't the kind that
Ben.
Ben was on.
No, but one of the reasons why they bring them here for tours is that Walla Walla was a training base for B-24s and B-17s. And anyway, so if you lived here in the mid-40s, that was a very common sound.
I saw one of the B-17s and the KC-135 up in the air together a couple days ago.
Wow.
I don't know whether they were connected or not, they were too far.
They wouldn't be
past.
connected, yeah.
We're in Spokane and we see those big old huge air refueling tankers go over so often.
Those
Yes.
are the KC-135s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're huge.
Yeah.
And when you're outside, all of a sudden you hear it.
Yeah.
Boy, I sure hope they keep that thing flying.
We had a man at our church who's now deceased who used to be the boom operator on the
Oh,
PC-135.
I've had students that
And
fathers
so we had one at our airport, and he gave me a tour of one. Also, one year I went out with Ben, and he gave me a tour of the B-24. And so, yeah, very, but yeah, anyway, that's, by the way,
Sidebar,
sorry, a number of years ago, on a Saturday morning, I was doing a graveside service for a World War II veteran who had been an active duty veteran in Europe. And just as we were getting the graveside service going, I looked up and I said, everybody stop, look up. And I'm not kidding, the B-17s were, it was here, it flew right over his gravesite. I mean, directly over our heads. And I said, this is like a tribute to his service.
Absolutely.
Besides that, they wouldn't have understood a word I said when it was flying over. All right. Marriage. Ooh, that's a good thing. That's what it says right here.
Well, we tried telling you guys, but
It's a good thing. Hey, you'll have to go home and share this with Eddie. Trish. I don't know if he's going to believe it. But one of the most significant relationships in life would be the marriage relationship. Despite Solomon's large harem, he still considered a good wife to be one of God's greatest blessings to a man. Unlike the Song of Songs, which focuses on romantic love, the Proverbs seems to emphasize the partnership aspect of marriage. Mutual respect is one of the keys to a healthy marriage. Other Proverbs suggest that having a contentious and quarrelsome wife could be as much a curse as a good wife is a blessing.
Don't say a word. Now I'm not showing Eddie.
The consequences of your words.
Moving right along, social and economic standings often determine a person's demeanor. Usually the poor are humble when asking for help, but the rich feel like they can throw their weight around. And I'm sure dealt with people in life that are that way. You know, some people are very difficult to get along with because they own everything.
well, I'm not sure the poor are so humble these days either.
Well, it all depends.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some poor that are like you're saying, they are so proud.
It's a life decision they've made, and
Everything's been given to them.
they want it to continue to be that way.
That's the
That's
difference.
because of our society.
Yeah, our society is kind of
Right.
eroded into that thing.
That's a spoiled brat.
I like the
That's
story
about the
of,
best way to put it.
I like the story of some people being, they had to change their flight because it was canceled, and some guy coming up, there's a long line, and this one guy comes up and demands a seat right now, and on, and the lady says, you need to wait your turn, and he say, do you know who I am? And so she gets on and says, would someone come, to this gate, because we have a man here who doesn't know who he is.
I'll tell you a true story. I was in the Seattle airport, and our flight had been canceled. It was snowing like crazy in the Pacific Northwest. We didn't know when we were going to be able to fly out of Seattle. I needed to get to Southern Oregon to do a funeral, and the guy ahead of me is talking to the the ticket agent, and he is just chewing her on one side and down the other, yelling at her, stomping his feet, and she keeps saying, sorry, you'll just have to wait. So finally he leaves in a huff. And I walked up, and in genuine humility, I felt sorry for this poor person. And I said, first of all, I just want to let you know that I feel sorry for what you're having to go through. This is not your fault. I realize that. I talked to her for a couple of minutes. I said, okay, here's my need. She said, I'll get you on standby. You'll be out the next flight. And the next flight came, they called the standby. I walked on the flight, and here's this guy who'd been in a huff. He's just seriously. Yeah, seriously. And it really happened. Yeah. So,
A kind word.
yeah.
Turns away wrath.
Yeah. Anyway, loyal companion is better than a fair weather friend. And that is definitely the case. We need to move quickly here. Let's talk about false friends in verses 1 through 7 of chapter 19. So for those of you, that might mean that you have to turn the page.
Better is the poor that walks in his integrity than he that is perverse in his lips and is a fool. Also that the soul be without knowledge, it is not good, and he that hurries with his feet sins. The foolishness of man perverts his ways, and his heart frets against the Lord. Wealth makes many friends, but the poor is separated from his neighbor. A false witness shall not be unpunished, and he that speaks lies shall not escape. Many will entreat the favor of the prince, and every man is a friend to whom they giveth gifts. All the brethren of the poor do hate him. How much more do his friends go far from him? He pursues them with words, yet they are wanting to him.
Yeah, it's interesting when they're warning about this lottery. And again, I don't buy lottery tickets, but I guess this was like a record-setting lottery. And there was a couple articles before somebody won it, saying that how many people's lives they feel have been destroyed by winning the lottery. And one of the ways is that suddenly you have all these relatives you didn't know about, you have all these friends you never knew you had, and they're all there with their hand out, you know. And of course there's many other reasons why that can happen. But so Solomon taught that wealth is useless, perhaps even dangerous, without a righteous spirit. Okay? So he didn't say that wealth is useless or that it's dangerous. He said it is useless or dangerous without a righteous spirit. It is better to be poor and have integrity than to be wealthy fool with a filthy mouth. The world is full of people with strong enthusiasm, but sometimes their desire leads them to acts of violence and destruction. These could be described as having desire without knowledge. And so while the Lord wants us to be enthusiastic about the kingdom of God, he does not want our enthusiasm to lead us into actions and attitudes that will dishonor him. In our passion, we may miss what is important. We may spend our lives climbing a ladder only to find out that it's leading against the wrong wall. I underlined that in my study guide. I love that statement. And I think it is characteristic of our society. Seriously. How many people are climbing that ladder feverishly, and then when they get to the top, they find it's the wrong wall. And so
Don't you think that's true for anybody who hasn't come to Jesus?
I do.
I do. Unfortunately, I do.
I do. So, anyway, on page 77 of your study guide, there is a little column there, a box entitled "The Gift That Opens Doors." Could somebody read that box for us, please?
Solomon taught that a gift brought to a ruler would curry favor with that leader. 19:6. It was customary in Bible times to bring large gifts to a king when approaching him for a diplomatic meeting. To attempt to approach a monarch without some sort of gift was considered an insult in that culture. Perhaps Solomon had one of his most famous visitors in mind when he wrote this proverb. When the Queen of Sheba visited him, she brought a great caravan carrying over 4.5 tons of gold, precious stones, and exotic spices. After her visit, no one ever again brought so many spices to the king. Perhaps because of her gifts, King Solomon gave the Queen of Sheba all she desired and asked for.
Well, according to this article, I think that she should have been the Queen of India, not the Queen of Sheba, because she curried favor.
Spicy comments.
It is.
You see, on my scale of 1 to 10, if Steve puns, I think I'll give that a 4.
Yeah, he wasn't very sage.
Hey, he's done worse.
Just give him some
I
time.
ain't
Some
got
time,
no
yeah.
respect
Oh.
around here. Have you noticed
Oh,
that?
wait, no. Todd had to go. He said, just give him some time and he'll get better.
Some time. Oh well. Winners of the lottery often report that persons that hadn't seen in years suddenly appear at their door. And again, I mentioned, the lottery and how dangerous that can be. On the other end of the spectrum are people who quickly desert associates who suddenly become poor. And you remember the book of Job in the Old Testament? And his 3 friends? Oh boy. And you call them friends? Like friends like that, who needs enemies?
Just lay down and die.
But at the end of the story, God restores many times over what he'd ever lost, and who ultimately was right in his perspective, and that was Job in all of this. So, all right, Solomon warned his readers about the consequences of being a false witness, and again, in Bible times, that could lead to somebody's death. Okay, and so you need to be very careful. Viewing people as commodities is not an attitude restricted to Solomon's time or the upper society. As Christians, we must always be on guard against seeing people as tools to promote our agendas. And that is very, very, very true. We've got to be very careful about our motivation for why do we do some of the things we do or some of the things we say. What is our motivation behind it? So, Proverbs 9:8-29 in brief. I'll read that because it's so long. Solomon concluded chapter 19 by discussing such issues as perjury, forgiveness, leadership, laziness, discipline, marriage, and the human desire for love. And so, anyway, very, very interesting. So, next week, pitfalls to avoid. We'll be in Proverbs 20-22. So we need to switch gears and get ready for our worship time.